Welcome to Take It from the Iron Woman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Iron Woman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Iron Woman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success.
Okay.
Take It from the Iron Woman. We only have special guests, and today we go and talk to Andrea. Her podcast is Talk About Talk. Hello, Andrea. Please introduce yourself. Who's Andrea who's going to join us today for the podcast?
Hi, Suzanne. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to be on the Iron Woman podcast. A little bit about me. I'm a communication coach, and I am obsessed with communication. I'm obsessed with understanding why people say what they say or don't say what they don't say and what they're talking about. And more recently, about helping people become better communicators. I earned my MBA, and in my previous life, I was a brand manager at Kraft Foods. Then I went to Harvard Business School, and I earned my doctorate in marketing. And you might be able to guess what the topic of my dissertation was. It's why people talk. I did a bunch of experiments, and I also analyzed online data to understand what's motivating people to talk. And the Coles Notes answer is that a lot of it, there are many motivations, but one of the main motivations is actually self-enhancement, making yourself feel and look good in your own eyes and in the eyes of others. Not surprising. After I graduated from Harvard, I taught marketing in the MBA program at the University of Toronto, Rotman School of Management, and I did some consulting and board work. And then about 2 years ago, I started Talk About Talk, and I really feel like I've hit my stride here now. I'm in my happy place. I'm researching, I'm coaching, I'm teaching, I'm doing corporate workshops, and I have a weekly blog with free communication skills, coaching tips, and a bi-weekly podcast.
I'm so happy to have you. Yeah. And we need you now, especially with the online virtual. I think on one hand, I see when I talk to the younger generation, I don't know if that's true, they're like happy, they go online and they talk. This morning I was watching a video, and actually I think the message was so good, but the person could not speak. It was like every other word was like, I had to stop listening. What can we tell that person to do? First of all, to contact you? Or
I have some ideas about that. First of all, your comment about it maybe being different across the generations. In my experience, it wouldn't be the case necessarily that older people may be more prone to having these crutch words versus younger people. I do think, though, that the older generations, the generations X and maybe even Generation Y, is more conscious of being online or communicating in a different environment. They're thinking about it versus the digital natives, the millennials, the Generation Zs they just are, right? Yeah. They're just online. That's actually the default. So there's that. I released a podcast at the end of 2020 where I talked about some of the communication skills that I've learned that I otherwise probably wouldn't have known if I hadn't started podcasting. And the big one, there are many, there were 10 actually, but one of the big ones is crutch words. And when you and I are interviewing people, and then also when we're editing it and we hear ourselves, and then we hear other people, it becomes very apparent. And in my experience, it doesn't mean anything about your intellect. It doesn't mean anything about your formal education. I've interviewed tenured professors they've written 20 books. And then I've interviewed people who say, I'm not really a business person and I don't have training in this, but I do have a comment. And then they don't have crutch words. It seems to be kind of random, but it is pretty easy to fix if you just listen to yourself. I myself would have a crutch word. I say right a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's like, right. Or I'll say, this is my point, right? To see if someone's in agreement. And I caught it when I was editing my own podcasts. Now I try not to. And the funny thing about editing your own podcast is you can quickly identify what the crutch words are and get rid of them, but then you use a new one. I joke about the fact that every 2 weeks I have a new crutch word
Yeah, that's funny. It's almost like group dynamics, right? They say you have a scapegoat, and when that person leaves, the person who does like everything wrong and you hate them, when that person leaves, a new person takes on their role. For me, those crutch words are also like right. And then I say, and so that the so has come up. So I think that's a new one.
Crutch words also apply to written communication, right? Right? Did you see how I just did that?
Right? Yes.
When I'm typing my newsletters, I find that I use the word so a lot there too. One thing you can do is to record yourself or read what you've written really critically, looking for phrases or words that you're repeating a lot. And if it's verbal, we're all on Zoom meetings. Ask the people in your meeting if they would mind, especially if you're having a team meeting at work that's kind of more casual. Record the meeting and watch it. First of all, it is horrifying.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, it is so worth it to me. This is the best, fastest, most effective and efficient way of improving your communication skills. For starters, you're going to see things that are annoying, but you're going to catch crutch words that you otherwise may not have caught. I really strongly recommend that. If you're giving a speech, of course, ask someone to record it and then play it back. And podcasters joke about our early podcasts we don't want to listen to because we're embarrassed and we know we've improved a lot. But if you listen to recent ones, you can build on the communication skills that you've already acquired, certainly.
And I have to add a cool example. I'm an executive coach and I've coached many people, and we want to make sure that successful people become more successful. Fantastic lady I had, like great with the team, everything. We did some role plays. She had 40, and I counted it, 40 you knows. You know. Yeah. And I tried to mirror her so that she would hear her. I couldn't do that.
She's deaf to it. She's deaf to it, right? She doesn't hear it. She doesn't hear it. It's like her default comment.
Probably.
Fascinating. One thing that I've noticed in a lot of interviews because I also listen to other people's podcasts, many people, whether it's the interviewer or the interviewee, will start off what they're saying with, "That's interesting." And I actually brought this up in that podcast episode where I said that's actually like a throwaway word. It doesn't really mean anything. Especially if you say it more than once. If you say it once in an interview, it's probably genuine. But more than likely, you're actually filling the silence so you can collect your thoughts and then answer it. I was listening to a podcast the other day and I stopped counting at 5, where the host 5 times in 10 minutes said, "That's interesting. Let me tell you what I think." And I was like, does he not hear himself when he's editing this?
Oh, okay. I will listen to this. I need to finish up the story for that lady with So we counted 40 and I said to her, let's work on that. And she says, the next time we met, I asked my husband and he says, yeah, you do that all the time. And what she did then to learn and to grow, she actually involved her team, and her whiteboard in the back of her office had like marks, like how many times she would say, so she actually made a little game out of it. And it was so beautiful to see. And towards the end of our coaching assignment, it was gone.
Oh, that is amazing. That's amazing. I applaud her and I applaud you. I mean, sometimes it's risky to point something out like that to people. They don't really want to hear it, but it sounds like she had a growth mindset and you had a great way of communicating that to her. So good for her.
What other tips do you have? I don't want to say it's interesting, awesome, or something, because we need to edit that out. But what other tips do you have? People want to gain time when they say, ooh.
So beyond crutch words, you mean just general communication skills tips?
Yeah. Like how can we make successful people more successful? And this example I have from this morning, that video, I wish I could listen to the message, but I cannot if that and comes up all the time.
A couple things. One, just as you and I were talking here, because we're on Zoom, Zoom makes it impossible to interrupt in the sense that we can't speak over someone. There's only one voice that's audible at a time. This has made, for me, the topic of interruptions even more salient. And then the topic of listening. With Zoom, we know that only one person can be heard. You have to be more strategic about if and when you want to interject. I use interject as the word because it's like polite, strategic interruptions. When we're on Zoom, I think there's several ways that people can interject, right? They can use their body language, they can raise their hand, or they can make a facial expression like, oh, I have something to add. You can use the technology and click raise hand. Some people in big meetings, I've seen this and it's absolutely brilliant. It's actually comic relief. They have a pad of paper beside their desk and a fat marker, and they'll write, great point, can I add something? And they'll hold the sheet of paper up to their camera. So I love that one too. And then what you say when you're interrupting. I learned this from some improv actors. Yes, and. If you're going to have a crutch word, yes, and is the best crutch word to have, because you are acknowledging and then you're adding or collaborating with what the other person has said. I read a blog recently from someone who said, when you're in a virtual meeting and you want to be heard, having a phrase that you use to acknowledge what the other person said, like, that's a great point. Can I just build on it? And then pausing so that they understand you're the one talking now. And I think that that's a great way to do it. And then the other kind of meta point that I wanted to make was, people ask me all the time, what's the number one communication skill that we should be working on and that makes people stand out as effective communicators? And that's listening, which is, you could say, the opposite of interrupting, but a lot of people think that they are listening simply when they're waiting for their turn to talk. But listening is so much more than that, right? There's different levels of listening. There's passive listening, which is what I just said. It's when you're kind of waiting your turn. And then there's active listening. And then there's empathic listening, where you're truly trying to understand. You're seeking to understand. And then there's collaborative listening, where you're internalizing what the person's thinking and saying and doing, and I guess communicating it back to them, and then creating something between the two of you or the team that is even better.
Can we go a little deeper into that collaborative listening? I do mindfulness coaching, and there we talk picking up the energy, like the vibrational communication. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, so in a sense, so vibrational, I love that word. It does become a rhythm, right? It's like a volley. You talk and I talk, but then sometimes there's a play on the other side of the net that lasts a little bit longer. And isn't that interesting? Is it going to go out of bounds? I love these metaphors. And then it goes back and forth. So I love that part of it. The ultimate level of listening, one of my guests, she called it generative listening. It's where you're really internalizing what the other person's saying, and importantly, what they're not saying. It's the words, it's the tone, and it's also the message that maybe they're choosing to go one way, but not the other. And then you're listening, like, is it because we should be avoiding that topic, or is it something we should be exploring? Because sometimes the taboo part of the conversation might be, if we exploit it, the thing that gives us the edge, or what. It depends on the context and the objective of the conversation. And one other thing that comes to mind is just being mindful and registering for yourself consciously, why are we doing this? Like, what are we in this meeting for? What is our objective? And what is my personal objective? And what is our collective objective? To me, is really, really, really challenging. Then I understand that from my clients as well. It's kind of the ultimate, it's like becoming a self-actualized communicator is the one who is conscious of objectives, but they're so internalized that you're actually just mindful of them all the time without trying to be mindful. It's like it becomes a habit.
The listening part, obviously you and I are coaches. It's so important. And what I also think, silence is important. And especially in Zoom meetings. And I had a meeting last week. We were 4 people on the call. And I asked maybe a little deeper question on, like, what else would you do? And I specifically was waiting so that person was able to think. And then another person jumped in and said, like, do you hear us? Do you hear us? So I think that silence, when we are with a person, the body language gets lost in a Zoom call, unfortunately. Do you have anything to add there, or any tips that we can learn?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I totally agree. Silence can be incredibly powerful. When I was a doctoral student at Harvard Business School, one of my dissertation committee members and basically my mentor was Professor Jerry Zaltman, and he created the Zaltman metaphor elicitation technique, which is a research technique, a qualitative research technique where you basically ask a lot of questions and then they use imagery and metaphors to answer kind of the meta question. And his big thing was repeating people's words back to them and then being silent. So if someone said, well, when I talk about nutrition for my kids with my friends, it makes me feel kind of like maybe I'm an expert at being a mom. And he'd say, expert? And go silent. And then the person would say, yeah. And then you get deeper and deeper. So you can really use that silence, and also reflecting people's words back to them, their own words back to them, makes people sometimes identify really deep insights that they have inside their mind that are more powerful, maybe more important in terms of answering a question that they might have or that you might have for them. And I was just thinking about tactically in Zoom meetings, if you're coaching 3 people, and I can just imagine the 2x2 square right on your screen, and you're moderating a discussion and you ask a question and you say, Suzanne, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And you go silent, and then everybody freezes, and then so that nobody wonders whether the screens are frozen, you could use your arm gestures in a deliberate way and just go, like, kind of communicating non-verbally. Isn't that an interesting question? Or take your time, basically, like look in the camera lens and give them the permission to take your time.
So many obstacles we have to overcome. We have a podcaster colleague, and she said she's teaching in Israel engineer students. And I said to her, actually, maybe for them, it's probably better to initially communicate on Zoom, because now I'm generalizing. Typically, engineers, they don't like to present. They may be more and more introverted. On a Zoom, they can prepare. They can have sticky notes all over that they wouldn't have. So I think Zoom also has some advantages for us these days.
That's true. That's true.
So cool to talk, Andrea. She has so much to offer. Listen to the podcast carefully. Listen to her podcast carefully. There are many gems that you can learn from. Take it from the Iron Woman. We have episodes every Monday, every Wednesday. Chime in. There's something for everybody. And Take It from the Iron Woman is also a book. Get it on Amazon. It's an ebook or a paperback. Thank you so much for chiming in. See you next time.